We often assume humanity's grandest tales are recent sparks in the vast fire of history. Odysseus outwitting monsters beneath a storm-tossed sky, King Arthur forging a kingdom in the misty hills of Camelot, or biblical figures carving paths through deserts under a divine gaze. These stories feel like they belong to a past we can almost grasp, their echoes familiar in our collective memory. But what if I told you there's a narrative far older, chiseled into clay tablets over 4,000 years ago, that dwarfs them all in its primal scope and enduring power? The Epic of Gilgamesh isn't just a relic of antiquity, it's a raw, unshackled cry from the cradle of civilization, wrestling with life's fleeting beauty, death's unyielding grip, and the burning desire to defy it. This tale hails from ancient Mesopotamia, a land of sun-scorched plains and life-giving rivers, where the Sumerians first pressed their stories into wet clay with reed styluses. Unearthed from the ruins of cities like Nineveh and Uruk, these tablets, cracked, dusty, yet alive with meaning, offer us humanity's earliest known literary masterpiece. It's a saga that transcends time, asking questions as old as consciousness itself. What does it mean to live? To die? To leave a mark that outlasts the flesh? Today we'll dive into this ancient world, unearthing its mysteries and discovering why Gilgamesh's journey still haunts us across the centuries. Gilgamesh, the semi-divine tyrant. Step into a world where kings weren't mere mortals but divine avatars, their every decree resonating with the authority of the heavens. Gilgamesh ruled as such a figure over Uruk, a thriving metropolis cradled between the Tigris and Euphrates in what's now southern Iraq. The Sumerians saw him as two-thirds god, one-third man, born of the goddess Ninsun and a human father, a being straddling two realms, his veins pulsing with celestial might yet shadowed by mortal fragility. His stature was colossal, his arms corded with muscle that could hurl boulders, his gaze sharp enough to pierce the bravest hearts. Uruk itself was a marvel of the ancient age, a city that seemed to rise from the earth like a dream made solid. Its walls, towering and thick, were crafted from millions of mud bricks fired in kilns, their surfaces baked to a reddish sheen under the Mesopotamian sun. Gilgamesh, the tablets claim, ordered their construction, a feat of engineering that stretched miles, encircling the city in a protective embrace. Beyond those ramparts lay a bustling urban tapestry. Stepped ziggurats loomed skyward, their flat summits hosting altars where priests burned incense to gods like Anu, the Sky Father, and Inanna, the fierce queen of love and war. Life in Uruk pulsed with energy. Narrow streets wound past mud brick homes, their flat roofs shaded by palm fronds. Markets thronged with merchants haggling over sacks of barley, bolts of dyed wool, and beads of lapis lazuli shipped from distant mountains. Canals glittered like ribbons of glass, channeling river water to irrigate fields of wheat and orchards heavy with dates. This was no primitive hamlet. It was a cradle of civilization, a testament to human ambition and ingenuity, crowned by the will of its semi-divine king. Yet Gilgamesh's reign cast a dark shadow. His divine lineage bred a towering arrogance, his strength twisting into tyranny. He drove his people relentlessly. Men hauled stones until their backs bent, women wove cloth until their fingers bled. Worse still, he claimed a grotesque privilege, the right to sleep with brides on their wedding nights, striding into homes with a predator's swagger, leaving broken families in his wake. The citizens endured in silence at first, their fear a heavy yoke, but soon their whispers of discontent grew into anguished prayers, rising like smoke to the divine assembly above. The gods, seated in a council amid the stars, heard Uruk's pleas. Anu, his voice a rumble of distant storms, and Enlil, his eyes flashing with judgment, debated the king's excesses. Their verdict was unanimous. Gilgamesh needed a counterweight, a force to curb his cruelty. From clay and divine breath, they shaped Enkidu, a wild, untamed being designed to match the king's might and challenge his dominion. His creation marked the beginning of a cosmic reckoning, one that would ripple through Uruk and beyond. Gilgamesh, though, was no mere despot. His hybrid nature made him a storm of contradictions, superhuman yet haunted, invincible yet fragile. He feared death's inevitability even as he wielded power, that bent the world to his will. Deep within, beneath the pride and the iron fist, stirred a restless hunger for glory, for meaning, for a legacy that could outrun the grave. He was the first literary hero, raw and unpolished, a figure whose journey would test the boundaries of mortality itself. Enkidu, the beast made man. Before he stood against Gilgamesh, Enkidu roamed a wilderness untouched by human ambition, a boundless realm of golden plains, whispering reeds, and dense thickets. Imagine him, a towering figure draped in coarse, tangled hair, his skin darkened by sun and wind, his body a map of sinew and scars earned in hunts. He moved with the grace of a panther, racing alongside gazelles, their hooves drumming the earth in unison. At dusk he knelt by crystal-clear springs, cupping water in rough hands, while at night he sprawled beneath a sky ablaze with stars, his heartbeat echoing the land's ancient rhythm. Enkidu knew no masters, no laws. He tore into raw flesh with teeth honed by survival, slept on beds of moss and grass, and answered only to the instincts that coursed through him. The animals, deer with liquid eyes, wolves with silver fur, accepted him as kin, their trust unbroken by the hierarchies that chained men. He was nature's child, a spirit of pure, unshackled essence, living in a harmony that civilization could neither fathom nor touch. That peace fractured when Uruk's hunters invaded his domain. Clad in leather tunics, their spears tipped with flint, they cursed as Enkidu snapped their snares, freeing goats and antelope with a flick of his wrist. To them, he was no noble guardian. He was a pest, a shaggy menace unraveling their efforts to feed the city. Their grumbling reached Gilgamesh's palace, a sprawling complex of mud brick halls and cedar beams, where the king reclined on a throne inlaid with shell and gold. Intrigued by this wild rival, he summoned Shamhat, a priestess of Inanna's temple, her reputation as potent as her beauty. Shamhat was a vision. Her hair cascaded in dark waves, her robes shimmered with threads of crimson and blue, and her eyes held a wisdom that could unravel souls. She carried the scent of sacred oils, myrrh and frankincense, and her voice was a melody of persuasion. She found Enkidu at a watering hole, his silhouette stark against the amber glow of sunset. Shedding her garments, she stood before him, unafraid, her presence a quiet command. For 7 days they lingered, her touch igniting fires he'd never known, her stories of Uruk's splendor planting seeds in his untamed mind. When it was over, Enkidu had changed. His hair softened, his movements grew deliberate, and the animals he'd once called brothers now shied away, their noses twitching at the human scent that clung to him. Shamhat took his hand, guiding him toward Uruk, and as they approached, the city's grandeur crashed over him like a wave. The walls rose like cliffs, their bricks etched with faint cuneiform prayers. The air buzzed with life. Potters shaped jars with spinning wheels, weavers clicked looms threading wool, and priests chanted hymns over the bleating of sacrificial lambs. Yet beneath the splendor, Enkidu sensed decay. He saw it in the hunched shoulders of laborers, heard it in the stifled curses of mothers, felt it in the tension that hung like dust in the air. Then came the tales of Gilgamesh's tyranny, the king who forced men to build until they collapsed, who claimed brides as his own in a ritual of dominance. Fury surged in Enkidu's chest, a primal outrage sharpened by his new understanding of right and wrong. He vowed to confront this king, to shatter the chains binding Uruk's people. The moment arrived at a wedding. Gilgamesh strode forth, his cloak of purple and gold trailing behind him, his attendants bearing torches that flickered in the evening breeze. The bride's family stood silent, their eyes downcast as he approached their home. Enkidu stepped forward, his frame a wall of defiance, his voice a low growl. "No more!" The clash was seismic. Fists cracked ribs, feet gouged the dirt, and the air rang with their roars. The people of Uruk gathered, their breath held as dust swirled around the combatants. But in the chaos, a shift occurred. Gilgamesh, panting, saw not just a foe but a reflection, an equal who could match his fire. Enkidu, blood streaking his face, glimpsed a flicker of solitude beneath the king's bravado. When the fight stilled, no one knelt in defeat. Instead, they clasped forearms, sweat mingling with earth, their bonds sealed in mutual awe. From that day they were inseparable, two halves of a whole, ready to face gods and monsters together. The quest for glory, the cedar forest. With Enkidu at his side, Gilgamesh's hunger for greatness grew ravenous. Uruk's riches, granaries bursting with emmer wheat, vats of barley beer, chests of turquoise and carnelian, felt trivial beside his new craving. He dreamed of a feat so monumental it would burn his name into eternity. His gaze settled on the cedar forest, a sacred expanse in the distant northwest, its trees revered as divine gifts. These cedars were giants, trunks wider than 10 men abreast, their bark rough and gray, their needles a silvery green that shimmered in the wind. Their sap, thick and amber, filled the air with a resinous tang, a scent said to linger on the clothes of gods. Guarding this holy grove stood Humbaba, a creature of nightmare forged by Enlil himself, his face twisted into a grotesque mask, with ropes of flesh coiling like intestines. His eyes blazed like molten copper, piercing the gloom. His voice boomed like a landslide, shaking the earth. His breath carried the stench of decay, and his claws, long as daggers, gleamed with the promise of ruin. To slay him would be to claim a victory no mortal had dared, a trophy of glory that would echo through the ages. In Uruk's council hall, the elders gathered, gray-bearded sages in robes dusted with ash from sacred fires. They clutched staffs of cedar and pleaded with Gilgamesh. Humbaba is the god's warden. To strike him is to court divine wrath. Their voices trembled with fear and reverence, but Gilgamesh's resolve was a blade, unyielding. Enkidu, though, wavered. His wild soul still felt the sanctity of the forest, the ancient laws he'd once lived by. Yet when Erjamesh met his eyes, burning with unshakable purpose, Enkidu nodded. Loyalty outweighed doubt. They sought Shamash's favor in the sun god's temple, a towering structure of whitewashed brick adorned with golden tiles. Gilgamesh slit the throat of a bull, its blood pooling on the altar, while Enkidu lit bundles of incense, the smoke curling upward in gray spirals. Shamash's blessing came as a warm gust, his voice a low hum. Go, but tread carefully. The path is perilous. With bronze swords at their hips and cloaks slung over their shoulders, they left Uruk behind, their silhouettes shrinking against the horizon. The journey tested their limits. They crossed deserts where the sand scorched their feet, the heat rippling in waves that blurred the sky. Nights brought howling winds that clawed through canyons, chilling their bones. They scaled mountains where shale slid beneath their boots, eagles screeching overhead, and forded rivers so cold their teeth chattered, the currents tugging at their thighs. Gilgamesh's sleep grew fitful, haunted by visions, flames consuming cities, beasts with eyes of shadow. Enkidu, his voice steady, deciphered each dream as a divine warning, yet urged them onward, finding shelter in caves and food in bitter roots. At last they reached the cedar forest, and the world seemed to hold its breath. The air thickened, heavy with the scent of damp earth and piney resin. Sunlight pierced the canopy in thin beams, dappling a floor strewn with needles and cones. The trees loomed like silent watchers, their branches swaying as if alive. Then Humbaba's roar split the stillness, a thunderclap that felled leaves and sent rodents scurrying. He emerged from the gloom, a colossus of terror, his skin gnarled like petrified wood, his presence a violation of mortal courage. The battle was chaos unleashed. Humbaba struck with the speed of a tempest, his claws rending bark and stone. Gilgamesh's sword clanged against the beast's hide. Enkidu's spear sought gaps in its armor, but Humbaba's fury seemed boundless, until Shamash sent winds that pinned his limbs, a divine gift tilting the odds. As he crumpled, Humbaba rasped a plea, "Spare me, and I'll kneel before you. Slay me, and the gods will avenge me." Gilgamesh faltered, his blade hovering, but Enkidu's voice cut through. "End it, or he'll rise again." The final strike silenced the forest, the echo fading into an eerie quiet. They felled a cedar, its crash a hymn to their victory, but a chill lingered. The gods were watching. The price of defiance, Enkidu's fall. The heroes returned to Uruk as legends, their arms laden with cedar logs, their names a chant on every tongue. Children raced through the streets, waving palm fronds in mimicry of their triumph. Women climbed rooftops, scattering petals of saffron and rose. In the palace, scribes etched their feet onto fresh tablets, the stylus scratching a record for posterity. Yet the god's favor is a fleeting thing, and mortal pride a spark that invites lightning. High above, the divine council convened, Anu's throne agleam with starlight. Enlil's hands gripped with storm-born might. Humbaba's death was no mere killing. It was a breach of cosmic order, a mortal fist raised against the heavens. Their judgment fell like a hammer. One must die. Enkidu, the wild soul who'd wielded civilization's tools against a divine guardian, bore the sentence. It began subtly, a shiver, a bead of sweat, then erupted into a fever that consumed him, a fire no water could quench. He lay in the palace on a pallet of straw and linen, his once mighty frame hollowed out, his skin sallow and slick. The strength that had wrestled Gilgamesh to a draw ebbed away, his breath's shallow gasps. In delirium, he cursed Shamhat, his voice a broken snarl. "You lured me from freedom into this cage of pain." Yet as death crept closer, his rage softened. He clasped Gilgamesh's hand, his grip weak but warm, and whispered blessings on their shared path. Then stilled, his eyes glazing over like a clouded sky. Gilgamesh shattered. He tore his royal tunic, threads of gold fraying in his fists, and his wails echoed through the halls, a sound rawer than any battlefield cry. Uruk mourned with him. Ashes dusted the streets like snow, flutes keened a dirge that pierced the dawn, and Enkidu's body was wrapped in linen and anointed with oils of cedar and myrrh. The funeral was a spectacle. A pyre blazed beneath the ziggurat, its flames licking the sky, while priests chanted hymns to guide his spirit to the underworld. Yet for Gilgamesh, the rites were hollow. Death had claimed his brother, his mirror, and now its shadow loomed over him too. Grief twisted into obsession. If Enkidu, strong as a wild bull, could fall, what hope remained for him? He cast off his crown, donned the pelt of a lion, its mane matted with dust, and fled Uruk, his hair wild, his eyes hollow. He became a wanderer, a king unmade, chasing the impossible, a way to defy the grave and seize immortality. The Sumerian flood, a glimpse of eternity, Gilgamesh roamed as a specter of himself, his royal grace reduced to a lurching gait. The sun baked his skin to a cracked hide, thorns gashed his feet until they bled into the sand, and hunger gnawed his belly like a living thing. He crossed lands where no man dared, plains where heat mirages dance, mountains where lightning split peaks asunder. Travelers spoke of a sage at the world's edge, Utnapishtim, the only mortal spared death's embrace. Guided by these whispers, Gilgamesh pressed on, driven by a dread that gnawed deeper than starvation. He found Utnapishtim on a desolate shore, where cliffs plunged into a sea that roared with restless fury. The old man sat before a hut of driftwood and reeds, his beard white as frost, his eyes dark pools of ancient knowing. Gilgamesh fell to his knees, his voice a rasp. "Teach me to live forever." Utnapishtim's gaze softened with pity, and he began a tale older than the rivers, the Sumerian flood. He spoke of a time when humanity's noise and corruption deafened the gods, their cities festering with greed and blood. Enlil, storm lord of the pantheon, decreed annihilation, a deluge to scour the earth clean. The skies tore open, rain falling in sheets that swallowed fields and homes, the waters rising until fish swam through temple doors. Ea, the sly god of wisdom, defied the edict, whispering to Utnapishtim through a reed wall. "Build an ark of gopher wood and pitch, save your kin and the beasts." For 7 days the world drowned. Mothers clutched infants atop rooftops. Ships vanished into the abyss until silence reigned, the earth a vast, glassy grave. When the rain ceased, Utnapishtim's ark lodged on a mountain's peak. He released a dove, then a raven, watching them vanish into the stillness. His offering, sweet incense on a makeshift altar, rose to the heavens, and Enlil, remorseful, descended. Touched by the man's obedience, he granted him and his wife immortality, a gift to outlast the cycles of ruin. Gilgamesh listened, his hope fraying. If even a flood couldn't sway death's dominion, what chance had he? Utnapishtim offered a trial. Stay awake 7 nights, and eternity is yours. Gilgamesh sat, his eyelids leaden, the crash of waves a cruel lullaby. Exhaustion won, and he woke to find 7 loaves beside him, each crusted with mold, a testament to his failure. As he rose to leave, Utnapishtim's wife, her hands gnarled as driftwood, took pity. A plant grows in the deep, she murmured, prickly, rare. It renews youth. Gilgamesh tied stones to his ankles and dove, the ocean's cold crushing his lungs. He seized the plant, its spines drawing blood, and surfaced with a gasp, only to rest by a pool where a serpent slithered forth, devoured his prize and shed its skin in mocking triumph. The truth sank in. Immortality slipped through mortal hands. The final lesson: immortality and legacy. Gilgamesh trudged back to Uruk, his quest a fading ember. His feet dragged, his pelt stank of sweat and salt, and defeat weighed heavier than any sword. Yet as he crested a hill and saw his city, the walls aglow in the dusk, the ziggurats piercing the twilight, he stopped. Those walls, each brick laid by his command, stood as sentinels against time. The canals shimmered, their waters feeding fields that stretched to the horizon. He entered the gates, the slap of his sandals on stone a quiet hymn. The streets unfolded before him, alive with the pulse of Uruk. Potters spun clay into jars, their wheels humming. Scribes scratched tablets with tales of valor. Children darted through alleys, their laughter sharp and bright. The air carried the aroma of baking bread, the tang of molten bronze, the faint musk of livestock penned beyond the walls. Gilgamesh paused by a well, watching a woman draw water, her infant strapped to her back, and saw not just a city but a living legacy. His legacy. He climbed the highest wall, gripping the rough brick as the sun bled red across the sky. The wind tugged at his cloak, carrying whispers of time's endless flow. He'd sought to outrun it, to wrestle eternity into submission. But now he saw. True immortality wasn't in the body's endurance. It was here, in the stones he'd raised, the lives he'd shaped, the stories that would drift from generation to generation like seeds on the breeze. The man who defied God stood transformed, his arrogance burned away by loss and revelation. He was no longer the brash king chasing impossible dreams, but a ruler who understood his place in the cycle of existence. Death would claim him, as it claimed all, yet his name would linger in the songs of bards, the carvings of scribes, the pride of a people who'd never forget. The Epic of Gilgamesh is no mere myth gathering dust. It's a mirror to our own restless hearts. It probes the fears we bury, the dreams we chase, the legacies we build against the dark. It reminds us that immortality isn't in escaping fate, but in the echoes we leave behind. If this plunge into humanity's oldest saga stirred you, let me know. There's a universe of ancient wonders waiting to unfold.